So when you first walk into a paint store, it can be pretty intimidating when you're a new artist to know what anything means on a tube of paint. It's hard enough you're choosing a color, and then there's, you're like, I just came for a blue, and there's, a dozen different blues, and then they have all these different codes on them, or jargon, and you don't know what any of it means, so you just grab a few and you hope for the best. So I'm going to talk through some of the really common ways that different artists paint manufacturers label their tubes of paint, show you how some are similar, some are different, kind of a little bit about what they mean, so that when you go into a paint store next time, you'll have the confidence and know what you're choosing. So I have a wide selection of different artist quality paints here today. And I'm looking just at the artist quality paints because some of the student lines or basic lines, they don't tend to have the same labeling. So any good artist quality paint will label the vast majority of the things I talk about here today. I really like how Golden does their labeling because they have a ton on their labels. I have a few other brands here just to show you, the odd example of where the labeling might be a little bit different, and to help you interpret those as well. So the first thing that we'll talk about is the brand. So the brand is good to know, but if it's an artist quality, it helps you identify that it's an artist quality, but generally I'm pretty happy as long as it's some sort of an artist quality paint. But some people really have strong preferences. So anyways, the logo, some of them are really easy to identify, like Golden Artist Colors, it's obviously a logo, but generally it's the largest text on a paint label, like this Chroma Artist Acrylics. This is a really small brand out of Vancouver, but they label theirs like that. And then Holbein's, not necessarily, I'd say it's still the biggest text on the tube. So now let's get into the actual paint name. Generally, that's the next biggest bit of text. So Golden Artist Acrylics, we've got teal, cadmium orange, cerulean blue, chromium, Chroma Artists Acrylics, got Hansel light yellow. This Winsor & Newton is probably the one exception. For some reason, they have the tiniest text. I guess because they have so many different languages that they do, but this is indanthrene blue. Next thing that we're going to talk about, because different artist lines or different artist quality paint lines might use some names that aren't really, they might use some more, whimsical names like teal. Now teal isn't overly whimsical, but it's not necessarily a true color. So you have to look also at the pigments. So there's pigment codes. So let's start with ultramarine blue, because every line pretty much is going to have some sort of an ultramarine blue. So PB29, that indicates it is ultramarine blue pigment. And you can Google these codes and find out all the different names that different lines might use for their PB29. So PB, P is for, pigment. B stands for blue, and then the number beside it, so this is a different type of blue, is 36. So that helps you one of the ways to identify that they are different types of blue. Now there's quite a few different codes, but they're pretty easy to follow. So they generally are the letter of the color. So pigment orange for cadmium orange, and cadmium orange is PO20. And there's, so PR red, PB blue, PY yellow, PO orange, PV violet, PG green, PBR brown, PBK is black, and PW is white. So generally pretty easy to remember when you're in the store. The actual codes themselves, that's a bit trickier. Some of them will be a mixture. They might label, like here, this Azo Gold. It says right here on the front, it's a mixture. And sometimes you'll find, whether it says it's a mixture or not, you might find the actual pigment code on the front, but sometimes it's just on the back. So this is PR 101, so that's the red number 101, and PY is the yellow 150. Now let's look at Holbein's. They do their labeling a little bit differently. So they put theirs on the back. It's a little bit tricky to read, but this is their Naphtha Red Deep. It's actually a mixture of two PRs, so two different red pigments, 146 and 122. Now, one exception to the pigment code labeling kind of rule that you have with artist paints, because you should always be able to find it if it's an artist quality paint, is Liquitex's cadmium-free line. This is a line they came out with a few years ago, but it is, and they label it on the back as a proprietary formula. So they're not sharing what pigments they actually use to make that. But other than those, you're going to be able to find what pigment, if it's a single pigment or mixture of pigments are in your paint. One more thing about paint names and pigment numbers. So I'm using these two as this example. Anthraquinone blue and indanthrene blue. They look pretty similar on the labels, and they are, in fact, pretty much exactly similar. They are both PB60s, or PB60 is their pigment number. So this is actually labeled as the pigment itself is indanthrone blue. So just knowing that, and on this Winsor & Newton, this one's so hard to read, this tube, but it says PB60. So they're both essentially the same. Sometimes there's minor variations between manufacturers, but it's going to be pretty close. Now let's talk about the opacity rating. And we'll start with this pretty common labeling, I guess, standard. Golden uses it, a few other lines use it. It's the different squares. So a white square with a black outline means it's very transparent. With a slash through the middle, so it's white with a black slash, that's semi-transparent. Then it gets more opaque. So this is semi-opaque, and you get a full black is opaque. Now, different lines do different labeling. So again, we'll go to the Holbein. They have right here a transparency rating. No, that's the permanency. An opacity rating. And they just move from one side of the scale to the other of more transparent or more opaque. Now, with opacity and transparency, there isn't a specific standard of what is opaque, what is semi-opaque, etc. It's, really a judgment of comparison. So transparent, azo gold, very transparent, but cadmium orange, much less transparent. It's quite opaque. And even within really opaque tubes, you can see these black lines through it, but you can't see them through this. So even within those ranges where two opaques might not be as opaque as each other. And I'm just going to mention the color swatch. Many of the artist quality lines use a color swatch, and that's real paint that they actually paint on in the factory. So, and generally it is over some sort of a black printed shape, geometric shape, and that helps you see how opaque something is in the store. Just keep in mind, like ultramarine blue, that's considered semi-transparent, but it's so dark that you don't really see the black underneath like you do with an azo gold. Naphthalene red deep. This one, it's hard to see, but they use little dots. So you can see the opacity or transparency of that. The one brand that doesn't do it is Liquitex. So this is just printed on. And that's not as handy. I really like when they have the real paint. You just really can tell exactly what the color is, because when it's something that's printed, you're never quite sure if that's actually what it looks like. Now let's talk about how light fast paint is. Now, most paints that an artist quality line releases is going to be excellent or very good, but there are some exceptions, and it's good to be aware of them. And it depends how long you want your paint to last. I try and get as many paints in the excellent range as possible, but I'm not too worried if I end up in the very good. So let's look at this golden one. Let's get it in focus. So it has this ASTM and a 1 inside of a sun. So the ASTM is an international organization that tests and provides light fastness ratings, and 1 is excellent. 1 is excellent, 2 very good, 3 fair, 4 is poor, and 5 is very poor. Now, one type of paint, even with good quality artist paints that has poor light fastness, it says right on the front of this one, is any of the fluorescents. So if you're doing a painting that's going to be in any sort of a sun, this is going to fade, and it's going to fade pretty quickly. If you're doing something in like a sketchbook and it never really sees the light, you probably don't need to worry about it too much. But I try and avoid these. I did have this because of a course I took, but any of the fluorescents won't last. Now again, Holbein, I kind of showed it before. They have a transparency rating that's more of a scale, permanency rating that's more of a scale. So this one isn't great. I probably wouldn't buy it again, but I got it. I'll use it. And let's just quickly look at chroma. They don't use the actual rating from the international organization. They just label it as, so in this case, it's very good. And that's typical for the Hansa yellows. Is they're not excellent light fast. They're generally very good. Now, let's talk about something you definitely want to pay attention to unless you have endless amounts of money, and that is the series number. So different pigments cost different amounts of money. So the artist quality lines will charge you different amounts of money. So if it's an inexpensive pigment, it's going to be a much less expensive tube of paint versus a more expensive pigment. So they generally use the word series. So in this case, series 3, that's kind of, I'd say probably about the middle. So series 1 generally is the least expensive, and it can go up to, depends how many levels that brand has, could be 7 or 9 or 5. So just look in the store, there'll be a little tag that says what the price is for a specific series, and that way you won't have the sticker shock if you accidentally pick up all of the expensive kinds. Now let's take a look at, let's say, the teal one. Generally, a lot of paint manufacturers will give, basic instructions. Where are they on here? Directions. There's minor, very basic directions or very general directions on the back. It just says to extend or thin, use golden mediums or water, clean with soap and water. So most tubes of paint will have some sort of instructions on it, but they're not necessarily instructions that are hugely valuable. And it'll also generally have some sort of health and safety information, and whether it conforms to certain standards. But again, these are pretty minor. And if you look at the company's website, generally they have a lot more safety information on there. So now that you know all of that, you can go into a paint store with confidence and choose exactly the type of tube that you want, and you can understand what you're purchasing. And if you want to learn more as a beginner or intermediate acrylic artist, subscribe to my channel. I spend a lot of time examining different paint colors, what they mean, and different color combinations, so please subscribe.